This episode is sponsored by Prodigy Math. Finish the school year strong with free game-based math adventures for grades 1 through 8. With so many innovative ways to teach and learn, Prodigy keeps everyone loving math long after the school year ends. Discover more at prodigy.com. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics welcomes you to Adding It All Up, a podcast created by and for mathematics educators and teachers. Join us each month as we explore current topics, insights, and emerging trends with thought leaders in the math community. And now, the hosts of Adding It All Up, NCTM President LaTrenda Knighton and NCTM Past President Kevin Degma.
It's officially summer for many of you. Like me, summer starts a little bit early here in the South, or at least it's teacher summer, which means we're going to swap our lesson plans for beach reads. And let's be completely honest. Some of us are going to unwind with thrillers, while others are going to dive into some professional reading like MTLT. No judgment here.
Absolutely. So today we thought it'd be fun to invite some amazing math educators to share their top summer reading picks from NCTM journals and books that really made them think. So whether you're looking for big ideas, practical strategies, or just something to get your wheels turning before the next school year, we've got you covered. But before we hear from our guests, LaTrenda, what's at the top of your summer reading list?
Well, my summer will be a little bit short, but some of my favorite mystery authors are going to debut some new books. So those are on my wish list right now. But I also have a plan to do some rereading for some professional reading. And one of the things I plan to reread is the Essential Understanding series, some of those, because as many states are rewriting their standards, it doesn't matter what we call our standards. We see some commonalities among all of them. And I feel if I take a closer look at that again, along with some of our newer resources and just in my own alignment, I can better support some people who are asking me for guidance as they try to navigate around their new standards. Because the big ideas in math are the big ideas in math. And that's the most important thing that we think about. What are those big ideas in terms of content? So I feel as if a reread of that series will really help me have a fresh look at those type of things. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading some mystery thrillers as well this summer. Professionally, I need to get caught up on mathematics teacher learning and teaching PK to 12. I'm not as bad today as I was a couple of weeks ago because I got caught up a little bit, but I'm really looking forward to reading the April and the May issues. The April cover article is the From Rules That Expire to Deeper Mathematical Thinking, and I'm so looking forward to seeing what the authors have to say with that and continuing that wonderful work that they've done. And in the May one, the topic is, what is a mathematical concept? And I was in a meeting recently where somebody said that was a really influential and a really thought-provoking article. So it's really making me look forward to diving into to get caught up on some of my NCTM journals. But let's dive in. So you heard from LaTrenda and I, but we have three wonderful guests here today. We've asked them to bring their recommendations and tell us why these publications are so valuable to them and why you might consider adding them to your summer list. So I want to say welcome to Corinne, John, and Chris. Can each of you introduce yourselves to our listeners? And we'll go in that order, Corinne and then John and then Chris.
My name is Corinne Day. I teach 7th through 12th grade math at a small school on the Crow Reservation in Montana.
Hi, I'm John SanGiovanni. I work as a mathematics supervisor and leader, and I just jumped over Chris because we were going in that order, right? I'm just kidding. I saw a reaction. I was like, oh, I wonder if I am. Anyhow, I'm John, math supervisor in Howard County, Maryland.
And I'm Kristopher Childs. I just like to say I'm a math educator. I love all things mathematics education. This is my heart. This is my passion. That's what I do. Math education all the way around the board.
Well, thank you all for being here with us. I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us. Corinne, we're going to start with you. What NCTM book or journal would you recommend to our listeners? And tell us why.
One of my favorite publications by NCTM is High School Mathematics Lessons to Explore, Understand, and Respond to Social Injustice. And I really love this text because it has ready-made lessons that you can implement as they are, but the lessons are also very easily adaptable. For example, I've taken a lot of the data in some of the lessons and then changed some of the questions or maybe some of the math content to fit the different grade levels that I'm teaching and the standards that I have to cover. But what I love about it is that there's a wide variety of topics. I understand that a lot of people are in situations now where they may not feel comfortable talking about social injustice because of the political climate or their school boards or their principals or their parents or whatever. But there are plenty of topics in here where you don't really have to use those words. For example, there's a lesson on climate change, but I would think you don't even have to necessarily mention climate change because in some districts that may be considered inflammatory. But the lesson itself just wraps around this lottery that is done in Alaska over when the ice will break on a certain river every year. And so there's graphs about the trends on how it has become earlier and earlier in the year that ice breaks. You could show that graph, you could talk about that interesting lottery and do all the math involved without having to use the words climate change. But the kids will get the message. They'll see what's happening. That way it can kind of avoid the hot waters you could get into depending on what district you're in. Now, I don't have to worry about that in my district. I can kind of teach what I want. The parents aren't upset. The school board's not upset. I've used some of the lessons. For example, there's a lesson with some police stop data that gets into the injustices involved in policing or the biases that appear to be there. So we look at some of that data. Then I've also added to that some national data that I've found that is a little more updated. And that also includes my state in terms of police violence and police killings. And so we're able to look at that data for my students who are a minority. It's always very interesting to have those discussions with them because some students, they know the reality. They know that they are sometimes profiles. They tell me stories of going into the closest city nearby and people follow them around the stores. They know that people are keeping a close eye on them. So being able to talk about things like that and use real data and have them dive into that data in my classroom is really meaningful for my students. So there's lessons like that I've used. There's also a lesson on wage gaps that I've used as well. It gives some interesting data about the cost of living in cities around the world. So it gives this cost of living website. And we've looked at that and had my students look at how the cost of living has increased over the years, what it is currently, what kind of wage it would take to have a living wage versus what reality is like if you're living on a minimum wage. So there's lots of really interesting lessons you can use. And then the book itself is just interesting to read because you learn a lot about a lot of different issues, whether you end up using them in your classroom or not. It's just a really informative read.
Thank you, Corinne, for such a comprehensive response. You gave us a lot of recommendations for teachers maybe who were not familiar with this publication of why this is a worthwhile read for them. And I love how you personalized this and shared some very memorable strategies or moments that you took away from this book. So when you think about yourself and other educators, who do you think would benefit most from reading this book? When you think about maybe in terms of grade level, content focus, or even just their mindset, what would you suggest?
I teach 7th through 12th grade, and I've actually found applications in all those grade levels from this book. It's focused on high school content, but a lot of the data is easily used in 7th and 8th grade as well, where data and statistics is becoming more a part of the curriculum. So you may not exactly teach the math. You're not going to be doing frequency tables with 7th and 8th graders, but they're learning how to read data and graphs. They're learning how to calculate percents. So there's lots you can still do with it. So I think really any secondary grade level, this is going to be something you'll find that you can use in your classroom. As I mentioned, it focuses on social injustice. So it's really great for anybody who's interested in learning more about that or somebody who's already interested in it, but wants to know where to find some good data sources. As I mentioned, you don't have to teach it as a social justice focus if you're worried about that in your district, because I know a lot of folks are these days. They're worried about how parents and their administrators or school boards will react. There's a lot of case lessons in here where you can just use the data as is and you don't have to use words or make it that focus so explicit, I think, and your students will still get the information and they'll still learn some interesting mathematics while also walking away with something that they can then think about, like with that lesson I mentioned on the ice breaking up earlier and earlier every year. I mean, kids are smart enough to put that together and say, oh, okay, my teacher didn't teach me a lesson on climate change, but I picked up what she was putting down.
Thanks, Corinne. That's a great resource. And one of my favorite parts about that resource is it's one book in a series of books. So you're bringing forth some of the work from the high school book, but there's also a middle school version of it and early elementary and the later elementary. So there's lots of good resources in there that are available to all of our listeners. So when you think about this book, what kind of summer reader would you say this book is? Is it someone that wants, some light inspiration, deep reflection, practical strategies? What type of read should somebody expect to get if they pick this book up and start diving in?
Well, I wouldn't call it a light read because a lot of the content in here is going to make you think deeply. Sometimes you're going to learn some things that maybe make you a little uncomfortable or make you realize that, wow, there's some issues in our country that really, they're troubling me and we need to figure out how to address these. But it's also inspiring because as an educator, you have the chance to influence future generations who are going to have to deal with these problems. The lessons are all put together in a very easy way. So you're going to get some practical strategies out of it while also learning some data behind some issues that a lot of teachers probably already care about and are already aware of, but maybe don't know where to get the data from, what the actual data is to be able to utilize in their math classes.
Corinne, are there any other books or journal articles you would recommend to our listeners?
The other book that I kind of went back and forth on talking about in this podcast is called Implementing Standards-Based Mathematics Instruction, a case book for professional development. And this is actually an older publication. It was one of the first books I was assigned to read when I was a master's student years ago. But what I love about it is it's just anecdotes from various classrooms that help to illustrate. It gives the two sides of every lesson. So it gives you a bunch of different lessons. Most of the lessons are focused on middle school math. In fact, I think all of them are, but it gives you two sides of every lesson. So it gives you one teacher who implemented the lesson in a way that maintained a high level of cognitive demand. First, it gives you the version of the lesson that didn't quite maintain that high level of cognitive demands. And then it gives you an example of the lesson where the teacher did maintain that high level. When I was early on in my teaching career, it really helped me to understand, okay, this is what it takes. I could have the exact same lesson and it could go in two different directions depending on how I do my questioning, how I maintain productive struggle, or whether I just jump in and save the students. And so it kind of clarified for me as an earlier career teacher, what does that look like? How do I actually make it work so that my students engage in the productive struggle that I want them to engage in? And it's really gave me an idea too of how do you teach basic concepts like mean, median, mode, and range in a way that enables students to figure those terms out for themselves rather than just like I would have thought early in my career, you just have to tell students what that means. There's no other way, but there actually is. And this book tells you some of those methods, like how do you teach some of this basic stuff that we think you just have to define it for students, but actually there's ways you can set students up to figure those meanings out for themselves, to discover those terms and experiment with data sets until they come to a conclusion on their own. I think for me, this was a game changer in terms of going from a very old school, I'm just going to teach the way I was taught, which is I'm going to lecture you, I'm going to give you practice problems, and that's math, to learning how to be a teacher that really helps my students engage in productive struggle.
Corinne, I think you've added to my reading list, I must say. So I've got to add some things to my list. Kevin.
Thanks so much, Corinne, for sharing the couple of books that really spark your interest and for your recommendations to our listeners.
This episode is sponsored by Prodigy Math. Over 800,000 teachers have used Prodigy in their classrooms. It's a free, game-based platform that covers over 1,500 curriculum-aligned math skills and makes learning fun. Learn more at prodigy.com.
We're going to shift to John now. John, what NCTM book or journal article would you recommend to our listeners?
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, you added to my reading list too, Corinne. So, Kevin, I'm a little bit like you in terms of about 35 journal articles behind at least. So summer's a great time to catch up on some articles. They're quick reads and opportunities to think about where I've been and where I'm headed. My article I want to lift up is positioning students as thinkers and doers of mathematics. And that was in the September 2024 issue. And it explores how teachers can intentionally elevate student identity and agency in mathematics by positioning them as confident contributors in their classrooms. As teachers, we often unintentionally affirm compliance or correctness and sometimes miss chances to affirm meaningful math thinking. So that's one of the ideas that it lifts up. It also lifts up that socio-mathematical contributions like strategies and reasonings and perseverance, etc. Those things enhance learning and they deserve recognition, which is something I want to speak about in a moment. It talks about being specific in feedback, which as a teacher is not something I always did a good job with. So it was really helpful for me to think about that and to think about who's being positioned to contribute in math and what contributions are firm. So this is an article that I've read a few times in the past week or so as early summer reading and highly recommend it.
Thanks, John. I love those recommendations you've given to others about why we should take another look at this article. That was always one of my favorite articles as well. So when you think about this particular article, and especially in your role as a supervisor and leader, who do you think would benefit most from reading this? Is it a particular grade level for a content focus, a mindset, or at a certain position in their teaching career? Who would benefit most?
I think we all would benefit from this article. I think giving explicit good feedback is hard to do. Saying something vague like good job is very off the cuff and something that I think we often say, but why did you do a good job? Why did your representation matter? How did it contribute to the conversation, etc.? That's something that would benefit a veteran teacher, a new teacher, a professional developer, or a coach who is working with a teacher on feedback. I think it's important for administrators and other math leaders to read this article as well, because it's something to look for as you visit math classrooms. And it's something that, again, I don't know that we get a lot of training on it. It takes a lot of practice. And so it could guide a school improvement plan for those individuals. To be frank, I really think it's for everybody.
I always love those articles that are so applicable to every single person. And I think you highlighted a variety of different audiences and things that they may be able to pull out of there. If you narrow down to just a single memorable idea, strategy, moment from that article, is there one that just really stuck with you that you're like, oh, you read something and it just sticks with you and you keep thinking about it over and over and over again for the next few days or weeks?
Replacing vague praise with specific, rational, driven affirmations. Your explanation helps others see blank. I appreciate how you use number lines because it helps us see the relationship between numbers, right? I like how you wrote an equation to go with your picture that both connected to the problem. You get the idea. Beyond, hey, I like your thinking. Well, what do you like about my thinking? Hey, you did a nice job. Well, part of my work is nice. I think that idea of being explicit and giving specific feedback, and not always what's worked or what's good, but what you might need to do to improve your communication or your perseverance or whatever it might be.
John, thank you so much for sharing your thoughtful insights on this article. And I love how you reminded us of the importance of intentional feedback so that we're really communicating with students about how they are performing and about their actions in mathematics. So it sounds like this article possibly had a profound impact on you and your work. So would you share with us how this article impact you and your work and how you support those in your district?
Yeah, so it again struck a chord with me because the type and quality of feedback that we give to students is tremendously valuable. And so I started working with our coaches, thinking about what would professional development look like for our teachers to support their feedback that they give, and not just in kindergarten or 12th grade, but across grades in mathematics, right? And what type of feedback are we giving and what are we affirming for that matter? So that's part one, is having conversations and starting to develop some professional learning around that. Another part is as we dig into our school improvement planning with our schools this summer, talking again with administrators about their perspective and understanding of feedback, but more importantly, what they can do to support their teachers in pursuing meaningful feedback in the coming year.
So when we think about all kinds of different types of summer reading, is this going to be better suited for somebody who's looking for a little bit of light inspiration, somebody who wants to do a little bit deeper reflection, somebody who's looking for practical strategies? What type of article do you think this is?
So check all those boxes. I think it is a light read, right? I think it's an opportunity to reflect on my work in the previous year and where I might want to grow as a math teacher. I think it's also an opportunity to start making some plans and pursuing what I'm going to do specifically in the upcoming year. I think one of the nice things about this article and so many others is that it comes with vignettes, so we can connect with those and take it as deeply as we'd like in terms of what would this look like for me in September? What is an action plan that I might take on, or would I do well with feedback and where can I polish that work? So to answer your question, it kind of checks all the boxes. I think it's up to the reader in terms of where they are professionally and where they want to grow.
I love reads like that. And I love your suggestion because it's versatile. So people can use it based on where I am in the moment. And I can reflect on my current practice and utilize this. So you shared some great things with us about this article. Are there any other books or journal articles that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, there's a laundry list, but I'll just keep it to one more. The comes along the theme of things that I just didn't really know enough about myself. And the next topic is from March of 2025. It's called Building Students' Metacognitive Toolboxes. Metacognition is such an important idea when it comes to solving problems, pursuing or persevering through productive struggle, one's identity, their agency. The moral of the story is this article from March 2025 is really great about unpacking what is metacognition, how does it come about, what can we do as teachers to develop it in our students, but also what things we have to put in front of them to engage them so they can develop metacognition for themselves. So that's one I would highly recommend. And really, I don't think you can go wrong with any article per se. It's about who are you as a math educator and where do you want to grow and where do you want to support those you work with?
I'm really loving our conversation today, and it's really reminding me of the importance that we continually grow as educators. We can't just become stagnant in our work, that we need to be looking at different articles, looking at different books and thinking about how is that affecting me? Who might be able to help me push my thinking a little bit? What can I do differently with my practice? What can I do differently as I'm working with different teachers? So I'm looking forward to hearing from our third guest as well and getting some more good ideas and some more things on my reading list or rereading list. So Dr. Childs, what NCTM book or journal would you recommend for our listeners and why?
I'm recommending one of my favorite books, The Impact of Identity in K-12 Mathematics, Rethinking Equity-Based Practices, the expanded edition. This book I have notes in here, is highlighted if I let you see my actual book. To me, is a catalyst for what we need to reimagine mathematics education and to make sure every child receives not an equal experience, but an amazing mathematics education experience.
That's also one of my favorites as well, Dr. Childs. And I still have so many layers to uncover with that. So I may need to have a little private book session with you on this. So what made this particular book stand out to you as something that you would recommend to math educators?
I want to first shout out the authors of the book. Initially, that drew me to it. The work of Danny Martin changed my life when I was in graduate school. And it was before he wrote this book. And I just gravitated to his work. Then Dr. Karen Mayfield Ingram, just who she is as a person. And then the dynamic Julia Gary. I was introduced to her work earlier when I was on the board of NCSM. So the authorship team, knowing who they are, what they represent, gravitated me to the first edition, K8. But then what I love in chapter 1 of this book, there are 3 critical questions that they ask. What mathematics? For whom? For what purposes? Oftentimes in mathematics education, folks feel as though they have a monopoly on what is mathematics. This challenges, what does that mean? Who is mathematics for? Often we teach to a certain group of students when teaching math, but understanding mathematics is for all of us to be a part of that experience. And then for what purpose? I love how Corinne in her earlier comments talked about the social justice book. We have to think beyond mathematics is just, can we get an answer? But what do we get an answer to? What does that answer mean? And through this book and through us rethinking mathematics, it helps us truly understand what are we trying to do.
I'm so glad that this was your favorite book for recommending. It's one of my favorites, and I know LaTrenda loves it as well. And I so appreciate the second version. In addition to that first version, and it's for someone who's read just the first version, you shouldn't say, there's nothing new in that second version. It's just updated. It is completely and totally new, and you need to read that second version as well. So Dr. Childs, who's going to benefit most from reading this? Are there any certain grade levels? Somebody who's trying to think about, somebody who's wrestling with a certain mindset? any type of audience that you'd recommend for this?
This is for any educator. And when I say educator, I don't just limit to folks that quote unquote have a job within the school system, but educators can be family members that truly wants to see every child experience mathematics in an amazing manner. That's who it's for. And we have to look at what does the data currently state. We know who is not getting amazing experiences. We know who is. And we have to be willing as educators, all of us, to say, hey, we need to do something different if we want to see a reimagined experience and some change, not only in society, but just in the classroom experience, because every single day, even while we're recording this, someone is in a mathematics classroom across our country, the US, having a horrible experience. And we have to look at ourselves as adults. What can we do to change that to make it better? Because if they're showing up, they want to understand and get mathematics.
Dr. Childs, this has been a very powerful discussion and just very affirming for sure. So you shared with us those 3 questions that are posed to readers at the beginning of this publication. Is there another memorable idea, strategy, or moment from this book that really stuck out with you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Now, the book is really based upon those 5 equity-based practices. I am going to say those because I want the reader to read about those 5 equity-based practices. And we'll talk about them a little bit more in the follow-up question. But what stood out to me, and as Kevin mentioned, there was a first version. In the new version, they added more chapters for the expanded edition. The chapter that stands out to me the most and is most impactful is chapter 8. Nothing to Prove, Seeing Brilliance and Creating Access for Black Girls in High School Mathematics. As a father of 2 daughters, this resonated with me wholly. And even though I'm going to take some liberties here, Julia, Danny, Karen, don't get mad. This is beyond for Black girls in high school. This is for Black girls in any grade level. And within this chapter, it makes us rethink, how are we teaching specifically Black girls, and why? And some are going to be like, why do you call out a specific population? Oftentimes we look at historically excluded populations as an anomaly or some over there, but as opposed to, all of us have hurt something on our bodies at some point. And when you hurt that body part, let's say right now, my knee is literally hurting. But if I put ice on my elbow, that's not going to help my knee. So the same thing, we look at what are the problems that we're facing in mathematics education, who's not getting it. Are we willing to be specific and speak to who we actually trying to help? And what I love about this book in chapter 8, they called out Black girls. It starts off the first sentence. I want to read this. Black girls are especially vulnerable to inequities that exist within mathematics education. That's a fact, and we have data to prove it. Now, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to do like me, put an ice on my elbow, knowing it's not going to help my knee? Or am I going to jump to my knee in that part that's hurting the most to make it better?
That's a powerful part of the book, and there's so many powerful parts of that book. It's making me put that one back on the top of my to reread list. I'm glad you elevated that again. You know, as you've read this book, and I'm going to assume you've read it more than once, and you've read parts of it more than once, as many of us have with such powerful work. Is there anything that you can say, oh, this has really impacted the way I interact, the way that I think about teaching? Is there a moment or two that's just been so incredibly impactful for you from this book?
The entire book was impactful from cover to cover, the first and the second one. It was so impactful that as I had the opportunity, I told you in the very beginning, I do all things math ed. I've had the opportunity to work on an open educational resource, a pre-K-5 mathematics curriculum. And I told the team, hey, if we're going to design something new and better, I want you all to incorporate these 5 equity-based practices into this program. Why is that? We think about which authorship teams often get included in programs as it relates to NCTM's publications. We always talk about Principles Actions, which is one of my books that I always go to. We talk about catalyzing change. We talk about so many authors that have given to the community, but we've never highlighted in curricula historically excluded authors. So for us, the entire book changed how I view mathematics education, changed how I live my career, but also pushed me to say, hey, this should be within a curriculum, just like we talk about all the other things, the 5 practices for discourse, cognitively guided instruction, all of those pieces. Why not add this piece in and showcase the power of reimagining a mathematics experience?
Thank you so much for inspiring us. Chris, today really just making me think I've got to take a couple more looks at this book. You've already told us that it's important that everyone who interacts with children or with math or with education read this book. So when you think about those readers, how should they think about this book? Should they think about it as light inspiration, like a light read, maybe for deep reflection, for practical strategies? What should they think about as their focus as they look at this publication?
Every reader should think about it from this perspective. Think about the child you care about the most. Do you want them to have an amazing mathematics experience? All of us as educators, I want you to think about the child that you tried to reach. And to be honest, we don't reach them all. I want you to picture that child in your mind, the one you tried to reach. You did everything within your power, and they still, in the lens of our educational system, were not successful. How did that make you feel? For me, when I think about that child that I could not reach, I see them in my head right now. I see them every single day. I wake up. I think, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? Because we often say mathematics helps us understand the world. We often say mathematics is a powerful tool. We often say everyone can learn math, but there's some child that we have all personally taught that did not get that experience. This book is for each of us as educators to think through, what can I do a little bit different? What can I do a little bit better to make sure no child is left out of a mathematics experience? And that's every single child. So think about that child you love and care about and what you want for them and what you make sure they have. Then think about that other child that did not make it. What can we do within our power to make it happen for them? This is who that book is for. And I know we talk about it as a light read, an easy read. Is it a practical read? I call it a necessary read. If you're listening to this podcast, we're in the year of 2025. A lot of things are going on in the US. A lot of things are going on in the world. And we always talk about, let's make this world a better place. It starts with us and what are we going to do? So for me, this is a necessary read for every single mathematics educator out there that wants to see this world become a better place.
Thanks so much. And I wholeheartedly agree. I love how you framed just the reminder of, despite all of our efforts, there are still those kids that we aren't reaching, and what can we do differently? And we just need to continually remind ourselves, we need to be looking at trying new things. We need to be trying to help reform the system. Are there any other books, journal articles that you'd recommend for our listeners once they're done reading or rereading Impact of Identity?
I think everyone should always read Principles to Actions. I think it should be an annual book. It's a quick read. It is a timeless book. Oftentimes, to be honest, I have a bookshelf full of books. Some of these books are one-timers, but that is one book we should continually pick up and read and just think through, what are the basics? Oftentimes, we get so complicated in teaching math. Just think about, what are the basic foundational pieces that we need to understand? So Principles to Actions is a go-to. And then my other go-to is always going to be Catalyzing Change. I think that was one of NCTM's most powerful book series, elementary, middle school, and high school. And I really want us as educators in this time period to lean into it. What do we literally have to lose if we lean into doing what is right by children, doing what is right by this system, to make sure, as we love math, everyone gets that same experience, then they can go back into their communities and do something different.
Well, please join me in thanking our guest today. This has been a very rewarding opportunity to listen to you. Of course, it made my reading list a lot longer, but that's okay. I love to read. I don't need to sleep, right? So thank you to our listeners for joining us for another wonderful episode of Adding It All Up. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and share the podcast with your fellow math educators. And catch us next month as we dive into data science and data literacy, exploring how we can help students make sense of the data-filled world around them. Thank you.
This episode is sponsored by Prodigy Math. Imagine real-time progress reports and ready-to-go curriculum-aligned assignments right at your fingertips. That's Prodigy, a free, game-based platform and your new favorite teaching tool. Learn more at prodigy.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Adding It All Up. At NCTM, we strive to bring you the biggest topics happening in mathematics. Join us next month for another exciting discussion.